Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about cellular respiration. But before we get into a lot of detail with cellular respiration, I want us to think back to last chapter with photosynthesis. The whole point of photosynthesis, we learned about energy, we learned about ATP, and we learned about how plants get the energy they need, or a food source to give themselves energy. Now, cellular respiration is the same thing, but not with plants, with humans, with animals, with heterotroph organisms. So we're going to be focusing about how we get energy. And that's what the whole big picture is. The whole purpose of cellular respiration is to get energy for our cells to work. Now, when we talk about cellular respiration, we're going to be talking about, in this lecture, aerobic cellular respiration. So if we break down this word aerobic, aero, the very beginning part, A-E-R-O, aero means air. So the definition is that it requires oxygen, something that our bodies need in order to function, something our cells need in order for us to survive. Now, with cellular respiration, what does cell respiration actually do? The whole point of it, the purpose of it. It's actually taking the food that we eat and turning it into energy. It's converting glucose. Remember, glucose we said last chapter was sugar. So it's taking the sugars from the food we eat and turning it into usable energy. As a reminder, that energy is known as ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So you guys are writing that down as a good reminder for yourself. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. So with cellular respiration, we are going to be talking about two types. In this lecture, we're going to be focusing on aerobic respiration, which means that we need oxygen. So this is how our cells get energy, by using oxygen. The second type is going to be anaerobic cellular respiration, which means that it does not need oxygen. So make sure you guys are writing both of these down. As a reminder, if you need to pause, if I'm moving too quickly, go ahead and hit pause, write it down, and then hit play and start listening again. So which organisms are going to be using cellular respiration? Well, if it needs oxygen, it's going to be animals. But if it doesn't need oxygen, it's going to be plants. So that's the unique thing about cellular respiration, is that both plants and animals will use parts of this. So our focus this lecture is aerobic cellular respiration. So aerobic cellular respiration is happening in a very important organelle, and that's going to be our mitochondria, the mighty mitochondria, the powerhouse of our cells. It's the powerhouse of the cells because it is the energy source. The mitochondria is providing energy for the rest of the cell to work. Now, with aerobic respiration, we are exchanging some gases. Think about what we're inhaling, what we're exhaling. So oxygen is used and carbon dioxide is the weight. We breathe in oxygen, we exhale that CO2. But this isn't focusing on our lungs, but it's actually what's going into our cells and what's coming out of our cells. But again, it is very similar to breathing. Now, breathing versus aerobic cellular respiration. So if we look breathing, we're taking in oxygen, it's going into our lungs, going into our bloodstream, through our muscle cells that need it, and then our muscle cells are essentially exhaling out that CO2, it's going to our lungs, and then it's exhaling out. Cellular respiration is a little different. We're taking in food or sugar, oxygen, and we're transforming it then into CO2, water, and energy. So the whole equation here, we have C6H12O6, and if you remember from last chapter, that is our glucose, or our sugar. So in order for cellular respiration to occur within our cells, we need to obtain sugar. We also need to have O2, which is our oxygen source. Our body is going to take these two things, and we're going to have a chemical reaction occurring. That's what that arrow represents, a chemical reaction. And then our body is going to produce CO2, which is carbon dioxide, H2O, which is water, and then ATP, which is our energy source. So our body is going to exhale the CO2. We're going to sweat out the water, or it's going to be eliminated from our body by our urine. And then the energy is going to stay within our body and be used to run our cells and to run everything else. So, like I mentioned before, we did say that this does take place in the mitochondria. Okay, what is that exactly? Well, it's an organelle. It's a mini organ, essentially, within our cells. Okay. Now, the reason that we're focusing on the mitochondria is because this is where it actually takes place. It's happening within our cells, but it's happening within the mitochondria. So the mitochondria plays a huge role. Just like in photosynthesis, it all took place in the chloroplast. Well, our cells don't have chloroplast. We've got the mighty mitochondria. So the mighty mitochondria can be found in our cells, and this is where cellular respiration actually takes place. Now, we're going to be focusing on 3 steps of cellular respiration. We have glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, also known as the ETC. So go ahead and make sure you guys write those 3 down. Now, they do happen in this particular order. And a little way for you to remember the order of them is go, kick, everyone. Or if you're feeling very nice, go kiss everyone. Make sure you have their consent. Okay, so it's just a goofy way for you guys to remember the order of glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and ETC. So our first process of cellular respiration, again, this is how our bodies are going to be getting energy. The first step is going to be glycolysis. So this is step number 1. In order for this step to happen, we need glucose. So again, glycolysis, glucose, both start with G's. So our body is going to take this glucose and we're going to break it down. And we are going to create 2 things, pyruvic acid and ATP, or pyruvic acid and energy. So if we put this in an overall reaction, we have glucose, the arrow, which represents our chemical reaction, pyruvic acid, and ATP. Now, this is taking place in our cells, but we're not yet in the mitochondria. This is taking place within our cytoplasm. That's that gel-like substance that's within our cell. It kind of holds everything in place. So glycolysis is taking place outside of the mitochondria, but it's still happening within our cell. If you notice, this step does not require oxygen. So plants could use this step, and humans can use this step. The Krebs cycle is the second step. In order for this to happen, we need pyruvic acid and oxygen. But time out. I want to jump back for just a second. This pyruvic acid, it was created in glycolysis. So in order for step number 2 to be completed, step number 1 needs to happen first, because we're taking this from step number 1 and we're using it to fuel or to start up the Krebs cycle. So we're taking pyruvic acid from the previous step, and then we're also taking that oxygen we are breathing in. We're going to take these 2 things and we're going to create carbon dioxide, which will be exhaled from our body, NADH, and then ATP. Now, the NADH, we talked about this in photosynthesis. That was that school bus, and that school bus is an energy carrier. So it's going to help carry energy to fuel the next step or to start the next step. The ATP, that energy source, we get a little bit of energy. So that's going to be released to other parts of our body that need current energy. So the overall reaction, pyruvic acid plus oxygen, we have a chemical reaction with that arrow, gives us carbon dioxide, which is going to be exhaled. NADH, it's that bus that's carrying the energy to start the next step. And then that ATP is being released into our body. Now, this is taking place in our cell, and now we are in the mitochondria. Our last step, step number 3, is our electron transport chain, also known as the ETC. So what's needed? NADH. There's our bus with our energy to start this up, and oxygen. So we didn't use up all of the oxygen in the previous step. We're going to take these 2 things, we're going to create even more energy, and we're going to create some water. Now that water is going to be released, like I said, either as sweat or urine. So our overall reaction is NADH plus oxygen. The arrow is the chemical reaction, and we're creating water and ATP, or energy. This is all taking place within the cell as well. Now, what's unique about cellular respiration and photosynthesis, if we take a look, photosynthesis, we needed CO2 or we needed carbon dioxide, we needed water, and we needed energy. And we created glucose and oxygen. Cellular respiration, we need glucose and oxygen to create carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So photosynthesis and cellular respiration, these equations are just flipped. So you guys already know photosynthesis, so aerobic respiration, it's just backwards. Pretty interesting. So again, this was just a quick reminder of glycolysis, Krebs, and the electron transport chain. We have this happening in our cytoplasm. These two are happening in our mitochondria, and we're creating energy in all of them.
All right, guys, so we're going to be looking at what goes in and what goes out of our cells during aerobic respiration. So this is a picture of an animal cell. We can tell it's an animal cell because it has that round shape, and we have some mitochondria, but we don't have any chloroplast. So this is an animal cell, and our focus is happening in the mitochondria where cellular respiration takes place. So we have 2 things going in and 3 things coming out. So as a reminder, we need, in order for aerobic cellular respiration to occur, the first thing we need to have is glucose. That's our sugar. We can get that by eating it. So it's eaten by the consumer. The consumer is us, or an animal, or an insect, whatever the case might be, but it has to be eaten. The other thing that's needed is going to be oxygen. Oxygen enters the consumer by breathing, so we have to inhale in order to take that oxygen in. So our 2 things that are needed, now we're going to take these 2 things, put them through some chemical reactions, and we're going to make 3 products. The first is going to be water. Water is going to exit the consumer either as sweat or urine. The second thing that is going to exit is going to be carbon dioxide. We can exit by breathing, by exhaling. As we breathe in this oxygen, we are exhaling this carbon dioxide. It's being made during that chemical reaction. The very last thing, the most important thing, is going to be ATP. ATP is that energy. The energy does not leave our body. It's actually going to be used by our cells to function. So it's going to be used to get those cells moving, get our muscles working, our heart beating, all that fun stuff. So aerobic cellular respiration, again, we need glucose and oxygen in order to make water, carbon dioxide, and ATP. Now, does a plant use aerobic respiration? Well, we said before that aerobic cellular respiration deals with taking in oxygen. A plant cell, again, we know it's a plant cell, there's a chloroplast and we have some cell walls, but a plant cell does not take in oxygen. They make oxygen. So they will not go through aerobic cellular respiration. However, they will go through anaerobic cellular respiration, which is going to be our next lecture you guys will be listening to later this week. If you have any questions, make sure you ask. If not, you need to rewind anything, please do so before you close out.